The transition back in New York after 8 years of being gone has been rough.
I had been out of the country for 10 years. I've been living in the Middle East. When you come home, everyone thinks you're going to be thrilled, like you've been exiled and you're, been let out of prison and you're so happy to be back.
What kept you there? What kept your mind and your soul and your heart over there versus over here?
I mean, I had a whole life there. I had friends. There was a period where I was working as a journalist. I met my husband, Frederick, who's a photojournalist, who was working in the region. He was covering conflicts in the region. I mean, he was based in Cairo. And I was only supposed to be there for 2 years.
Well, 2 years turned into 10. What do you know?
Turned into 10,
We are all looking for adventure. We are all looking for adventure.
All right, everyone. Hello and welcome. Thank you for watching us on That's Okay. I'm your host, Paulina Butska, and I am joined right now with the beautiful Mimi Rohr from California. Mimi, me and you met when I was living in California almost 6 years ago, 7 years ago, I want to say at this point. It's been a long time that we've known each other. You became an extended part of my family. You became my pseudo mom. I was so young when I moved to California. I was 23, and that's when we met. But I felt so attracted to you right off the bat because our stories were so similar. And once again, I'm in a new life cycle and I'm in a new beginning and chapter in my life. And once again, our stories seem to kind of cross paths. So one of the reasons why I asked you to talk to me is because you are full of incredible stories. I mean, we would sit there and we would chat about anything and everything about life for hours. And I'm sure one of the first things that came to mind when you met me was, what the heck are you going to talk to with a 23-year-old? And it turned out we had a lot in common. Is that not what you thought?
That isn't what I thought, because
No?
you were so interesting from the get-go. I was, drawn to you too. And we had a profession in common. So
We did.
I was not at all worried about talking to you.
Oh, I'm glad. Right now, where I'm at in life is I moved back to New York City recently. And the transition back in New York after 8 years of being gone has been rough. I'm not even going to sugarcoat that. It has not been easy. It has not been smooth sailing. On the contrary, it's come with a lot of, there's been tumultuous moments between myself, my brother, my mom, everybody, it kind of ruffles feathers. And you had a similar situation in life where you left the country and then had to come back to the country. And you are now living in Oakland, California. And you were not totally okay with being back in Oakland. Is that correct? Is that right to
I
say?
was not at all being okay. I was living in the Middle East. I was living in Cairo, Egypt, with my husband and my two oldest kids. And there was this perfect storm one summer. It just everything snowballed. My mother was ill here in California. She was terminally ill. I became pregnant with our third child. Our oldest kid wasn't doing well in school. And within a month, we just decided that we were going to leave. So in my mind, I didn't even have time to, prepare mentally for the departure. And when you come home, I had been out of the country for 10 years. I've been living in the Middle East. When you come home, everyone thinks you're going to be thrilled, like you've been exiled and you're, been let out of prison and you're so happy to be back. And it wasn't the case. I was gone for 10 years. Even though I'd come to visit, there was a 10-year gap in my cultural knowledge of stuff that was going on here. The friends I had were just, happy to see me once or twice. I didn't really necessarily have so much in common with them anymore. And it was a really hard transition that I wasn't prepared for. And no one seemed to understand. There was like virtually no support. And I think I cried almost every day for the first year I was here.
And I love when we had kind of hashed out what topic or what story we wanted to tell, because like I said, you come with a plethora of stories. And this one was so true to me. And for anybody who's left home, honestly, like you, I've gotten so much cultural experience from traveling to different states and different cities and immersing myself in different cultures. And really weirdly, the United States is, yes, all 50 states, but every state has their own culture. Every state has their own people, their way of doing things, the way people talk and interact with one another. And it's so different from one another. And like you, I'd come home to New York so often, and I'd be happy to be home, happy to see my family. But it's not easy. And that has to be okay. So talk to me about kind of where your mental state was when you first got back, and kind of what were the hardships other than not having friends and kind of not being mentally prepared. What did that look like for you, that first year being back?
Well, it was a rough year overall because my mother was terminally ill and my sister-in-law was also diagnosed with cancer. I was pregnant. I was 5 months pregnant when I came back. So my hormones were already all twisted up. We were living in my mother's house. So it was like an invasion, the poor woman. And we got caught in this housing market that was, just heading up.
Mm-hmm.
And so we ended up there a whole year, which made it even harder because I wasn't even in my own space to, even have the kids have their friends over or something like that. I was in a hot mess. I don't know how else to say it, but you know that you have people are dependent on you. You have to go on. You just have to just wake up every morning and do it. And then, my children had never lived here like me. They had just come to visit. So it was a whole adjustment for them too. So, you don't have time to think about yourself. You just have to wake up every morning and
see, you had a lot of other determining factors that played into your mental health when you were kind of dealing with this, because for me, it's really me, myself, and I. My dog and my two cats, they don't really have a say as to where they go. They just kind of get on the road with me, right? But you had this whole army of people, your kids, your husband, and I'm sure your mom wanted you to be a certain way, your friends wanted you to be a certain way.
My grandmother.
Your grandmother. What did you do in those moments to kind of bring yourself back and find that you time, to find that mental clarity?
Okay, first of all, there was no me time. But I would put the baby in the stroller and walk. That's
Okay.
all I could do. That's always been the way I am. Just walk, exercise. I went on a long walk today.
So you did quite a few hikes when I was in California. No true time for yourself. What finally snapped you out of this moment of, I can't keep going the way that I'm going, but I need to find happiness where I'm at right now?
Well, I think it's time. Just, it's time. And then also realizing, especially we have such the luxury here of having a lot more control over our destinies. I mean, I lived in the Middle East and I saw so much of women's lives decided for them. I mean, and you're seeing what's happening in Afghanistan right now. It's just, we really, as bad as things may be for us at times, we have certain luxuries that a lot of women in the world do not have.
So with that being said, the luxuries that we have, and knowing that you're in a country that gives women, yourself, more rights, did you long for the Middle East? Did you long to be back there? Like, what was what kept you there? What kept your mind and your soul and your heart over there versus over here?
Well, I think it was really the people. There was so much warmth there. I mean, I had a whole life there. I had friends. There was a period where I was working as a journalist over there. And it was actually at the end of the day, I recreated a lot of that same stuff here. And the one thing I did learn, it took time, but is that you create your own life. I remember a friend of mine from the Middle East coming here and saying, "Oh my God, your life is exactly the same." You have like similar, they weren't obviously the same friends, but they were similar types of people I'd surrounded myself with. It just, it took some time. And being in the US, especially as an adult, and I think you may have experienced this, it's hard to lay down new roots, make new friends. It happens over time.
It does. It does. And I think that, as somebody who has now called 4 states home, that first year of transition really is the hardest, being back, for a variety of different reasons, and I'm sure that the viewers and listeners who are going to be listening to this have their own struggles of why being home is, this place that you want to be back in, but when you're there, you're like, I don't know if this is home. What made California home for you? What was that moment for you, that turning moment that was like, I can live here, I have to live here, and I have to make peace with this?
I think when the boys got into school, I also did something. I had taken my husband's name in the Middle East when I got married, but I never changed any paperwork here. And remember, I'm back living in my hometown where I grew up. So when I went back to my maiden name, because it was a mess, it just was much easier. Was able to reconnect with my past, and it wasn't even necessarily people I knew, but I went to a medium-sized high school, and they would recognize my name, and there were people that helped us, me and my family, get a foothold here.
In terms of journalism, because you've been a journalist for a big portion of your life, and you've done it across the seas and overseas, I should say, and here. How does that kind of molded and shaped your life moving forward into this new journey that you took in America again, your homeland?
Yeah, well, it actually helped me, rebuild myself here. Remember, I've been more than half of my journalistic career has been here in the US. And I was very lucky to work for a small local newspaper. So I was reporting in the community that I was living. And it was great because I met all kinds of people. And because it was a community journalism position, a lot of the stories were uplifting and positive. And it allowed me to meet different kinds of people. And it's kind of scary, but you'd be in print, and then you'd go down into the business district, and you'd be in the streets talking to people about what you wrote, which has its pluses and minuses. Well,
Every time.
I always want to hide the day that the paper came out,
because you never know the reaction. People are, kind of have. What is the saying that I don't know if it's just for everybody, but it's kind of we have one in Polish that says, for every one person, there's, for every 1,000 people, there's 1,000 opinions, right? Because there's 1,000 people in the room. So it makes sense. You're not going to please everybody. And that's definitely something that as journalists, we struggle with. Can you walk me through a little bit more of kind of what your life in Cairo looked like, and what the story is a little bit more as to what made you guys come back here? What made you guys leave to Cairo in the first place? Talk to me about that. Let's go back.
There together. We met in Cairo.
Okay.
So I went over there to go to the American University in Cairo. I wanted to do a master's in Middle Eastern Studies, and I wanted to do it in the Middle East because I knew that in terms of, politics and history, there's a different side of that story that you don't always hear here in the U.S. I do have some Middle Eastern origins. My grandmother's from Lebanon. And I met my husband, Frederick, who's a photojournalist, was working in the region. He was covering conflicts in the region. I mean, he was based in Cairo. And I was only supposed to be there for 2 years.
Well, 2 years turned into 10. What do you know?
Turned into 10, And he and he was only going to be there for a couple of years too. But we kept saying, "Oh, just one more year. Oh, one more year." And it got to the point where I really thought we would be there forever. And since we got married at the French consulate in Cairo, and our 2 oldest boys lived there, I actually thought we'd be there forever. because every year I'd say one more year. And then sadly, I actually put off doing stuff there that I wanted to, like, go to Jerusalem or something. Because the kids were little. I thought I'd wait till they got older.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was that perfect storm one summer and we left.
What was that journey from Cairo back to America? Because did Fred grow up here too, or no?
No, Frederick was born in France. He grew up for a time in Lebanon and then was back to France. So it's not American. So the first thing we had to do was get him a green card, which we'd already been married for 9 years before we applied. So that was not a huge deal, but it only took a couple of weeks too.
Oh, wow. Talk about an immigration system back then.
Well, we'd run into an American diplomat who said, do it at the embassy, do it here. Don't do it there. Meaning here in the US. So, but go on.
No, I was going to say, what was the culture shock for, like, you grew up in the US and even though 10 years removed, that's a long time. I know that when I came back to New York, I think after the first time when I moved to California, I came back after 6 or 9 months, one of those, and everything looked different. Like the people were still the same, the people that I knew, but everything around me was so different. And now being back, 8 years later, it's the world is different. The city is different. The people are different. So you having to navigate through that while also having to navigate through a French Lebanese husband who's never lived in the US. What was that like?
Well, I'll tell you, there's one funny thing that comes up is I went to, get phone service. And phones in Egypt were just, you might have one line and one extension. So, obviously here it's very different. And I remember them saying, do you want like call waiting or a caller ID? And just having this blank look on my face. I didn't know what any of those things were. What was interesting for him was he thought he knew everything because he'd seen all the movies.
Right.
And of course, being here was, a bit different than that.
What was that transition like to life back in the US? I was 5 when I immigrated to this country. And, all we knew of America was, of course, everything that we knew from movies. And as did my mom and my dad. And, their idea was so skewed as to what the US is like. And even now, our family back home, back in Poland, their ideas of what we do or like what our life is like here is so different. And it's so disconnected from what the reality is. How did you guys navigate through all of that? Because that takes a mental toll on you too.
You just do it. But what I will say, and I will say this from Frederick's point of view, is, well, you could ask him. I think it was a lot harder than we thought it was going to be. Just it wasn't. I mean, it's easy to open a business, but to be successful, it's a lot harder. There's a lot more competition, I think, than he'd anticipated. Of course, my family was so happy for me to come back. They made it seem like it was going to be really easy. So.
And I think that's what families do, right? They want, like, if I know my family wanted me back here and they were so excited. Paulina's coming back to New York, all the friends and family and everybody knew. And really, I love being back. I love being here. I mean, clearly I'm in my family home, my brother's house, my mother's bedroom. And I love spending time with my family, but there is that, like, in Polish we call it docieranie się, right? Like you have to it's like sandpaper, right? Like you have to groove it out until it kind of molds and jives together. And that's where we are, right? Like we are all adults who have been through things. And Mimi, you've been through quite a few things other than traveling, to America and having to restart again, even though this was your home. Was there ever another time in your life that you can think of where you came to a crossroads and you didn't know what life had in store for you, and you just had to take life by the horns and say, this is the hand I've been dealt. This is what we're doing.
There was a point where we thought we were going to have to leave. It was, after 9/11, First there was, there was a backlash against people from the Middle East, and then there was a backlash against the French because they didn't support in the way that we wanted them to. And it became really hard. And there wasn't a lot of work. Frederick's a photographer. And we thought we might have to leave, that it might get so bad we had to leave. It was to the point where we went to France because I said, I want to be able to, if we have to do this, I don't want to do it like we did the last time coming to America, where it was just by the seat of our pants. So I actually went and was planning out stuff, kind of seeing where we might live, how this might work. And then things calmed down and we ended up staying. But because it was so sudden and we came here and we're just trying to figure it out on the fly with 3 kids, I was never going to get in that situation again.
How did you rebuild your life again, being back here? I think, 3 kids, a husband, a new country again. What was your first, what was the first phone call you made when you were back here? Like, what did you do for work? What did you do for even trying to get back into regular day US society?
Well, it's interesting. That's very interesting. First of all, when I first got here, I was having a baby. I was taking care of a terminally ill mother. So I wasn't working for, I don't know, maybe the first 2 years. And this is how life is funny. I was with my kids in the local park. And I said something to my oldest son, Sebastian, in French. And there was a woman with her grandkids there. And she started speaking to me in French. And it turned out she was a French professor. She was here visiting her daughter for the holidays. And she starts talking about her daughter. And her daughter is a journalist. She played the violin in high school. She's telling me about this, her daughter, and it's about, and she lived in the same neighborhood too, and with kids the same age. And it was like she was describing myself to me. And so I met her daughter, my friend Janet, who we became fast friends. And Janet was working as a journalist. And then she became the editor of the local newspaper, and she immediately pulled me in.
These chance meetings that we have in life that we think are by chance, or I think I've said this so much in every single episode that I've done. They're not by chance. They can't be. I feel like we gravitate towards people who have similar lives, and everything happens for a reason. Even me and you meeting, we bonded, Mimi, over the fact that I said, I lost my dad. I traveled to California. I was really running away from all my problems. And I said, I'm starting a new life. This is my clean slate. Nobody knows what happened. Nobody knows about the suicide. It's not tattooed across my forehead. I'm in a new city and I don't have to think about it. I'm in a new state. I'm, 3,000 miles away. And then here comes Mimi Rohr. And Mimi Rohr is like, yeah, my dad passed away and I kind of did the same thing. And here we are.
And I went to New York.
And you. So talk to me about that, because I think that, again, the people that we come across, if we only give them a moment past that superficial hello, we all have so much more in common than we think.
And that's one of the reasons I liked so much being a journalist. Was for that very reason, is that you would meet people that you wouldn't normally meet, and you'd sit and you would talk to them. Usually I did a lot of business and business features and did a lot of feature stories. So I would sit and talk to them about what they're doing. And it does. You're absolutely right. It gives you an opportunity. If you just, you're paid to listen to them. So you're going to listen to them, right?
Maybe not, but yes, generally.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, I think from what I've learned is that so many people have these stories. We just have to ask them.
So I'll tell you one thing I've learned over the years is when I was younger, something bad happened, something I didn't like. I would run away. I
Mhm.
would get on a plane. I would move. I would, my grandmother even told me that. Something you don't like happens, you're on the next plane. When you have a
I don't know
family,
where I've heard that one before.
you have a family, you don't get to do that. So my father died. I was 21 years old. Was a new college graduate, and I, was here for 6 months, and then I left. I left to New York. From New York, I went to Cairo. I was gone, I think, I don't know, 12, 13 years. When I came back here to live and just, being in the same town, going into the same places that I'd been as a child with him, I really had to go through a period of mourning and becoming okay with his passing, that I realized I just had put it off because I, just like you did, I just left and tried to start a new life that wouldn't remind me of the terrible thing that happened.
Did that play a role into how you adapted that first year coming back to America?
Yeah, it just added to the whole awful crying, piece.
Been there, done that. I think that, that resonates so much with me because, I'm living in Albany right now. I am 2 hours away from where my dad died. And part of the reason why I left was because he died. I didn't want to be around anything that looked like him or reminded me of him or these memories of him. And the thing is that you can run as far as you want, but you won't outrun the memories and you won't outrun the things that will keep slapping you in the face until you kind of deal with it. What was it like dealing with kind of that emotional baggage that you were carrying with you all throughout Cairo that maybe you didn't know you were carrying, and then into your relationship with your husband, your kids, and then being back here? How did all of that kind of mingle?
You know what I do think, Paulina, maybe this is true for you too. I think maybe we go back when we are ready to deal with it, because both of our fathers died in pretty, dramatic ways. And maybe we couldn't deal with it before. And then maybe, you go back when you can. Although
Maybe.
if I'd had my way, I would have stayed in Cairo. Well,
If I had it my way, I would not be in New York. So I think, I think that's the thing. I think, you said it beautifully and so well, that sometimes life just shows us what we need more than what we want. I'd love to be on a beach somewhere in Miami, but that's not possible. And New York is where I'm at, and that has to be okay. Even those moments when you don't want to be okay. How to deal kind of with those demons that you were running away from, and those, you built a life, and you do, right? You built a life in Cairo, you built a life in California before that, or in New York for however long you were there. And I built a life in every city I've lived in. But I still have a life that I never tended to here.
I mean, I just think you go through it, not around it, not over it, don't hide from it. But again, maybe it's best that you're ready. But don't avoid it, because you can't avoid it for your whole life. It will always come back to haunt you or get you.
I think where we are right now, you and I both, we are in healthier places, happier places. You have now lived in California for how long?
It's been more than 20 years. I thought we were only going to be here 5 years, and then the kids are in school, and then they have their lives. And I think there's something to be said for, when my kids have friends they've known since they were 5 years old. They've been raised in one community with a lot of stability. So we chose to stay to give them that.
And you see that, and it's coming back to you too, in many separate ways, I'm sure.
They've actually thanked me for it, thanked us for it.
So as uncomfortable as it was for you as a parent to kind of go through that, you ended up creating something very stable and beautiful for your family moving forward.
Well, you'd have to ask them.
I have talked to your boys. I think they turned out to be really good kids and young men now, because they're like, what, a few years younger than me? So
yeah, I know. They're not much older. They're not much younger than you.
Mimi, anything else that you wanted to add that I have not asked that you think anyone listening out there, anyone who is kind of going through something similar that we went through, whether it's running away from some of the trauma that we've experienced or adapting into a new home life that used to be home and may now be a new home. Do you have any advice or anything else that you wanted to add?
I think that it is like the life that I have here now is a completely different life than I had, when I left, before I left. Now I've actually over the years, more of my old life has come back in new ways. I mean, people from my past that at one point I didn't feel like I had a connection with anymore have come back in. But I think you don't go home and expect it to pick up where you left off, expect everything to be the same. I think you have to be open to having a new life where you have had a life in the past. And eventually those two lives will meet.
I love that. I think that was said so beautifully, because so often we do, I had an expectation of when I come back to New York, I'm going to have X, Y, and Z. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and then you kind of start pre-planning and thinking that this is how your life's going to look. And what's that famous quote that like tell God your plans and then watch him laugh at you kind of thing? It's the reality, right? Like, I mean, you could plan everything that you want, but life is still going to get in the way of it. So, we can plan until we're blue in the face, but just kind of roll with the punches and take them as they come.
There you go. Roll with the punches and be flexible.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else that you wanted to add?
I'm so proud of you, darling.
Oh, I love you. I love that this like morphed into both those topics, because when we had spoken originally, I just said to you, I want to talk about the move and kind of being home and it's okay to not be okay being back home. And really our stories are so intertwined that, you ran from your trauma, I ran from my trauma, and 10 years later, 12 for you, 10 for me. You're back at a place where you did not want to be. For anyone listening, that this really just brings some kind of comfort to them, knowing that there are people out there who are going through this, and it takes time, patience, something I don't have. You have a ton more of it than I do. But really time is something that we take for granted. So, Mimi, thank you. Mimi Rohr, everybody.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Challenge, draw me in, 'cause I want more.